Video games have limitless possibilities, but that doesn't mean you're just okay to do everything. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 video game things you weren't supposed to do. Just a quick little note before we get going on this one. Some of these are just things you're not supposed to do, and some of them, well, you're a dick if you do them. Starting off at number 10, using glitches to grief other players. We're gonna just start off with something that flat out sucks. Finding exploits and ways to break a game is relatively harmless to do in a single player game. The only experience you could potentially ruin is your own, and frankly, if you're hunting for glitches and stuff, that's probably not a real big concern. But if you're playing multiplayer, then the potential consequences are a lot worse. Instead of just affecting your game, you affect dozens, hundreds, or hell, entire servers of people. Yes, people have managed to use glitches to take down entire servers. Examples include an incident from RuneScape back in 2009, where people found that trying to display a certain character in public chat would instantly crash the game's client. If you disabled your own chat display, you could just go around spamming this character in public chat, and it just crashed anyone's game who was nearby. Another nasty example of this kind of thing happened in an online multiplayer game called Global Agenda. Players discovered a bug in the auction house that basically allowed them to create money pretty easily, and when the developer Hi-Rez found out about it, they started banning everyone who had duped money, whether they'd created it or not. Alleged griefers used this opportunity to try to spread the bad money around as much as possible, causing a lot of innocent players to get banned. There's tons of examples of this kinds of thing, but it always sucks for people who just want to play a game normally. Yes, finding glitches is fun and interesting, but don't use them to ruin other people's fun. It's wrong. And number 9 is exploiting glitches to duplicate gold. A lot of time and effort goes into creating the in-game economy of games. Most developers want to keep things relatively balanced so that players can't just easily collect piles of money and make the game easier for themselves. This is especially true in multiplayer games where real money gets involved, but let's sidebar that for now and just talk about single-player games where players have found ways to make a ton of money easily. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game where cash can sometimes be hard to come by, but if you take advantage of this infamous unlimited gold farm trick, that's just no longer the case. Basically, all you had to do was find the specific chest in Limpany and load your game at a certain point to make it so the chest would give you unlimited gold bars. Now, Rockstar did eventually patch this one out. In The Witcher 3, there's a sword called the Pang of Conscience that you could loot an infinite amount of times for free money. And of course, Skyrim had a handy little spell called Transmute that was rare to find but ridiculously powerful. You could turn any iron ores into gold, which you could then turn into jewelry with an enchantment, and suddenly money is no longer an issue. There are probably even easier ways to break the economy wide open in Skyrim, but this is just one example. At least with single-player games, the worst that can happen though is the tricks get patched out. Unlike in MMOs, where if you start duping gold, you're in danger of getting banned and you're doing something annoying and potentially really mean. And number 8, cheesing the hardest bosses. Like with in-game economies, developers put lots of effort into boss fights that good developers anyway. Some of them don't. Generally though, they try to make them a carefully tuned challenge. Sometimes they go a little overboard, so finding a way around these guys sometimes just makes sense. Elden Ring, for instance, is one of the hardest games out there, but the amount of ways players have found to deal with tough bosses is impressive. Probably the easiest means of taking down some of these guys is just get the Rivers of Blood sword and start spamming the special attack. It does a ton of damage, causes bleeding, and can potentially stagger an enemy to boot. One hilarious trick you could pull in the first Dark Souls game was against a real pain in the ass, the Capra demon. Instead of trying in vain to fight this thing, one easy way to take it out is to just throw poop at it over the wall. It takes some careful aiming, but it's possible to throw dung over the boss door and have it land on this guy from outside the boss arena. Hit him enough and he'll die from toxic poison, and that saves you the trouble of trying to fight him. And number 7, using exploits to gain huge amounts of experience fast. Another thing that the developer probably doesn't want players to do, keeping in mind that a lot of the challenge of designing a well-balanced game is creating a carefully constructed difficulty curve that involves handing out levels slowly as the game progresses. If you find some way to get around that and get a ton of levels with relatively low effort, you kind of messed up those plans. Like in Elden Ring, where you can kill the Elder Dragon and the Dragon Pharaoh right at the start of the game. Like, you'll need patience and or some kind kind of bleed weapon, but otherwise this thing is basically harmless. Killing it nets you tens of thousands of runes, enough to make a lot of the starting bosses almost trivial. Other Souls games have even easier ways to acquire resources. Instead of runes, Bloodborne gives you blood echoes for the enemies you kill, and while the game is more linear and a little harder to exploit in the main game, in the Chalice dungeons, basically anything goes. Using a save editor, a player managed to create a dungeon where you get a ton of echoes just by walking forward, and that's it. All you have to do is appear in this place, walk forward a bit, so you see some distant enemy die, and suddenly you're showered with enough blood echoes to level up. These tricks can almost trivialize a game, so obviously it's something a lot of developers would rather you didn't do, but we can't blame somebody for using them anyways, especially if they're struggling with the game. And number 6, getting outside the map, and for a lot of players, getting immersed in the world of a game is a big reason why they play them. So glitches and game-breaking stuff that show you what's actually going on behind the curtain kind of negatively affect their experience. That said, on the other hand, there are tons of players out there that just want to break free of the constraints of the game. There is a whole world out there to explore, and a world underneath the world, or maybe there is a negative void, and that might be interesting to explore as well. It can be difficult depending on how much the developers want to keep you out, but it's also kind of a fun challenge that they've unintentionally given you. Skyrim is a game that almost makes it too easy to break out of the world. One famous trick involves using a wooden bowl or platter and placing it flat against the wall, then walking into it. Somehow this allows you to push through the wall and teleport into closed-off locations. Another funny one involves using ice grenades in Arkham City, which, if you time it right, will cause Batman to float off into the air, flying right past the barrier, blocking off the rest of the city. Of course, there's nothing that's actually there, but it's fun to go exploring outside the bounds of the map. And number 5 is sequence breaking a game. Popularized by speedrunners, sequence breaking occurs when players manage to play through a game in an unintended order, either by finding some way to skip to a section of the game, or getting certain items earlier than intended, stuff like that. The main thing to keep in mind here is the word unintended. A real sequence break only happens when you manage to do something you're really not supposed to do. Like if a developer intentionally made it possible to skip or avoid certain sequences, that doesn't really count. We're only talking about things you weren't supposed to do here. Elden Ring, of course, has many unintentional and intentional skips for that matter, but one of the more interesting unintentional ones is near the end of the game at the Farum Azula, where if you use the right combination of skills, you can jump off of a ledge into the bridge leading to the boss arena, allowing you to skip to the end of the entire area. The Metroid series practically invented the sequence break as we know it. There's a lot of skips that the developers left in on purpose, like the one from Metroid Dread that allows you to kill the Kraid boss easier, but there's also many more that the developers did not plan through at all. Pretty much every popular game out there has some kind of sequence break you can pull off, so obviously there are a ton of them. A lot of the time they're only useful for speedrunners, but there are a few that are pretty big, like Fallout 3, where if you know where it is, you can just go straight to Vault 87 right at the start of the game and skip around 60% of the main campaign. And number 4 is finding glitched beings. One of the more interesting things gamers do is find things in games that aren't supposed to be there. Sometimes enemies get removed from a game during development, but through some trick, players are able to find them. Oftentimes, certain entities are bugged and just come out wrong. Either way, they're encounters you're not supposed to see. One of the most famous examples of this is the missing NO from Pokemon Red and Blue, a bizarre glitch that apparently occurs when your game interprets your character's name as a random encounter data. This mess of pixels is supposedly made from leftover data from removed Pokemon combined with a random data read as stats, so while it's not supposed to exist, it's still something players can encounter. Another well-known example of this kind of thing is from Red Dead Redemption and the Manimals, where for some reason NPCs would take on the behavior of birds, horses, and other animals. It was equal parts grotesque and hilarious, but Rockstar eventually did patch that out, so getting actual footage of these things can be a bit of a challenge. We've mentioned Chalice dungeons and Bloodborne, but using those, players have managed to find a fairly large number of unfinished bosses. Considering how secretive From Software can be, you better believe they never actually wanted players to see these unfinished things, and it's pretty amazing you can see them as long as you find the Chalice dungeon they're in. At number 3, getting loot and completing challenges faster than the developer intended. It's similar to the gold farming point from above, but more related to online games. Compared to the griefing example, it's a little more positive, but it's still something the developers didn't want. Unlike single-player games, where there's really no reason for developers to come in and remove reward exploits other than for balance purposes, when you're talking about online games, there's also a financial incentive. For many of these games, there's microtransactions and in-game currency tied to progression, so when players find a way to complete challenges or get loot faster, it could potentially lead to lost revenue. Like with Forza Horizon 4, there are weekly challenges in that game that can be easily exploited by taking advantage of the AI. When you make custom tracks, the AI always follows the route exactly and avoids taking shortcuts, so it's relatively easy to make a track that appears difficult, but you just send the AI on a roundabout that any human player can easily skip. It makes completing challenges very easy, like certain ones can be finished in literally seconds. Destiny's famous loot cave was similar. A quirk in the AI would spawn enemies non-stop at this cave in Destiny, where players would just sit at and blast them for hours on end to farm for weapons. It wasn't exactly the most efficient method, but it was also very easy. Like pretty much any free-to-play game has players searching for ways to get in-game money faster and easier, and the better the strategy, the more developers will try to stop it. And number 2 is doing way more damage with weapons than intended. This is another case where developers for the most part want their games to be balanced, but players are looking for the best and most efficient ways to win, so there's going to be some kind of conflict at some point. Elden Ring is a game that just outright struggles to balance its weapons, like even if certain things like katanas still seem to stand out as the best. One game that's also always struggled with weapon balance is Destiny 2. Bungie had their work cut out for them because they have to somehow manage to make guns that are fun to use and at least somewhat balanced for both PvP and PvE content. So naturally, there's some problem. The Telesto is a pretty infamous one. What made that weapon so good was that the explosive bolts it would shoot were, for some reason, being treated in-game as enemies, meaning players could just shoot the ground with it and then destroy the bolts before they exploded to earn kills, which made it so they could charge special abilities much faster. Another bizarre one is Jotun, which players found out would actually do more damage depending on the frame rate of the game. Double the frame rate, and at point blank range, this weapon would do 10 times more damage, which is absolutely nuts, and made it so that players could melt certain raid bosses with ease. Weird stuff. And finally, at number 1, making the game easier by doing things that just make no sense. Compared to the other things on this list, these are the kinds of things developers just leave in by mistake. Things that players probably wouldn't think to do the first, second, or even 10th time they play the game. But if you do them, they make the game a lot easier. Like here's an example. For whatever reason, in Metal Gear Solid 3, the cardboard box is completely fireproof. Unless you're taking direct damage from a flamethrower, fire will just not hurt you if you're in a cardboard box. Hell, putting on a cardboard box while you're on fire will immediately put you out. That is how powerful this cardboard is for whatever reason. Or in Crash Bandicoot, where these annoying bridge crossing levels exist, where you have to carefully jump between boards to avoid falling to your death. They're tricky, but there's an easy solution. Just jump on the rope holding the bridge up and walk across that. That's all. Blitzball in Final Fantasy X can be a really challenging minigame, but there's one way to easily exploit it. All you ever have to do is make at least one goal, and then you're good to go, because if you take your ball back to your own goal and just swim around, the AI doesn't know what to do. Like, they don't know how to react if you just choose not to play the game. These aren't really glitches, they're more mistakes and exploits the developers just left in the game. Most developers probably aren't too crazy about players taking advantage of their mistakes either. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.